Hey guys, welcome back. Today I want to dive into a pretty hairy topic and something that I get questions about in the comments all the time, and that is whether or not decluttering can become an addiction. Sometimes people sort of posit that I've become addicted to decluttering or that I've somehow gone too far, and other times people comment on or question their own practice of minimalism and wonder whether or not it's starting to step into addictive territory. Now, right off the bat, I want to say I'm not a psychologist. Addiction is real. I can only speak to my experiences and the experiences of those around me, but today I wanted to spend a little bit of time unpacking this idea and sharing a little bit about what I think some people may be experiencing. I think part of the reason people like to declutter is that it feels good. Let's just put that right out there. I think for many of us, the reasons we start decluttering are completely individual and varied, but I think for many of us, we often become dissatisfied with some particular area of our homes or our lives, and so we decide to declutter that one space, and then when it's done, we can stand back and appreciate it, and it is mind-blowing. Maybe other people don't get it, but we have achieved clarity and simplicity in this one place, and we start to realize that we can achieve the same thing all over our homes and all over our lives if we just repeat this process. So the decluttering bug bites, and a few years down the road, maybe you're still doing the same thing. But I think that part of the reason it feels really good is that we live in a society of rampant consumerism. And so sometimes we don't notice the oppressive weight that our possessions can impose on us. And when we start to lift that up, even just a little, it can be a revelation. It can be life-changing. So we want to continue this practice throughout our lives. The question is, can that go too far? Can decluttering become something that is an obsession or an addiction? I think the simple answer is sure, anything can be an addiction, and if it gets in the way of your relationships or your well-being, then that's a problem. But minimalism on its own is a very intentional practice. It encourages us to be mindful, and mindfulness is in many ways the exact opposite of addictive or even compulsive behavior. Minimalism often helps us to better appreciate our relationship to consumerism and materialism, and that can often lead to positive changes in our lives, like being less wasteful and spending our time and money and energy on things and practices that align with our values. Nowadays, minimalism is so kind of mainstream. There are so many great examples of different minimalists out there sharing their experiences. We can kind of stitch together the spectrum of minimalists and minimalistic practices. And for many, myself included, minimalism may be so personal and subtle that to the outside observer, they might not notice anything different with how I live my life. Nobody has once come into my house and immediately been able to peg me as a minimalist. And I'm not sure I would want them to be able to do that. That's not really how I want my house to look. That's not how I want to live my life. But that's my own brand of minimalism. And then there are other people out there who have more sort of obvious practices. Maybe they've downsized to a smaller home or a tiny home, or they're extremely mobile and they live out of a backpack. There are people who do that and they're very happy with those lifestyle choices. Now, it's impossible to kind of draw a line in the sand or in that spectrum and say, beyond this point, minimalism is too extreme. It has gone too far. We can't do that because there's nothing inherently wrong with any of these practices on their own. Certainly, we might be uncomfortable if we were sort of shoved into somebody else's ideal of minimalism that we didn't want to subscribe to. That might make us uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that there's anything inherently wrong with that practice or with that person who happily chose to adopt that lifestyle. So I think the question becomes one of, does my practice of minimalism harm the health and well-being of myself or any people around me? Does it expose any of us to risk? And I think for the majority of minimalists, this may seem kind of like a silly question to ask, but I think it's worth a little consideration. Let's take a benign example. Say some minimalists apply the practice of minimalism to their social lives, not just their physical space, but also to their social lives. And this may take the shape of prizing certain relationships, say family and friends, really close core relationships, and prizing those over people you might not know as well, or maybe that you don't spend as much time with, or that you don't really like as much. Is that harmful? Well, maybe not, but it also could be. If you're in a point in your career where building your network and building a lot of connections is incredibly important, then isolating yourselves and prizing some relationships over others might have bad unintended consequences. Let's take a little bit deeper of an example. Maybe you want to declutter your house, but you don't have your spouse's consent, and you end up throwing out something of sentimental value to them. Is that harmful? Is that harming the well-being of others around you? It could be. It's a question worth asking. And of course, there are even more significant negative consequences that could happen depending on where your personal brand of minimalism kind of falls, but it's definitely worth asking and sort of reflecting on this question a little bit, especially if you're responsible for other people. I thought I was going to end this video here, but I don't think I've actually addressed the concern I usually hear whenever people comment about their own practices of minimalism and kind of a concern for whether or not they're doing it too much. Now, I have very limited context whenever I receive comments like this, and I'm not going to share specific comments that I've received from people, but what I generally interpret is sort of one of two situations. It's either, what I see is either someone who is excited about decluttering, maybe they're recently into it and it has now become their entire personality and it's all they talk about at dinner parties, and or I see someone who is excited about decluttering, maybe they're on a roll, they've been doing it for a while, but they've been doing it for so long and they don't see an end in sight that they wonder if they're just going to be decluttering for the rest of their life. And so I think if you're sort of experiencing the first situation, if it's just become your entire personality, I think it's actually great that people are passionate about minimalism and willing to talk to others and educate others about the benefits of minimalism. All of that is wonderful, but if you think you're becoming obnoxious at dinner parties, then minimalism really isn't the destination. Minimalism is a way to achieve something else. It's a way to get your time and your energy back. Instead of spending that on your possessions, you can then spend it on the people and your passions that you are interested in pursuing. And so maybe use some of that newfound time and energy to figure out what you're passionate about. Try a new skill, try a new hobby, and then you can talk about that and minimalism at dinner parties. And if you're that second person, if you're deep in the throes of decluttering and you don't see an end in sight, you think this is the only thing you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life, then I totally sympathize. I have been there. I can, again, only speak from my own experience, but what I've noticed in my own practices of decluttering is that I tend to declutter in waves. And so when I start noticing things around my house that I don't need and that I'm not using, I declutter them. And when I reach a point of stasis, I stop. And for a while, as I was going through my entire house, some places many times over, the bar for what I deemed as a necessary item to keep kept moving. And so I feel like the decluttering waves were coming pretty frequently. But now I'm incredibly happy with the stuff that I've chosen to keep and the amount of stuff in my house, and I'm able to enjoy my space and my life and my things with a lot more intention. And if you're still in the throes of decluttering, that could be a really good sign, because it means you have the motivation you need to keep going, which makes you different from a lot of people who just sort of wish they would get rid of all this stuff their whole lives and never actually do. All right, I feel like I went all over the map with that one, but there were some pretty intricate corners to unpack, and thank you for allowing me to extinguish these thoughts from my brain. I hope that if you've been struggling with any of these questions yourself, that maybe hearing some of these thoughts can help you out. That's going to be it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.